All right, let's just dive right into this explainer by busting, hands down, the biggest data privacy myth out there. Look, if your organization's knee-jerk reaction to collecting data is just slapping a consent checkbox onto a form, well, you're doing it wrong. Today, we're going to challenge that legacy habit and completely rewire how you think about data compliance.
Welcome to the Explainer. So today we are looking directly at the foundation of Cambodia's new law on personal data protection. We call it the LPDP for short. Honestly, consider this your urgent wake-up call. We're moving way past abstract legal theory here and focusing entirely on the day-to-day operational reality of handling personal data under this incredibly strict new regime. Because, the grace period, it won't last forever. The way you process data literally has to evolve right now. So, here's our roadmap for today. We've got 4 stops. First up, the LPDP reality check. Second, rewiring processing habits. Third, accountability and rights. And finally, breaches and enforcement. Let's get into it.
All right, Section 1, the LPDP reality check. Who is caught in the net?
So the absolutely crucial point here is that the definition of personal data is incredibly broad. It is essentially any piece of information connected to a living, identifiable individual. We're not just talking about a name or a phone number. It could be a location ping, an IP address, or even a physical characteristic. Simply put, if your business interacts with human beings in any way, you are processing personal data. Period.
Let's think about the Macomb Trading Company example from our source material. They're an e-commerce firm, right? Their servers are in Singapore, they use a US-based cloud support tool, but, and here's the kicker, they target customers in Cambodia. So does the LPDP apply to them? Absolutely it does. Whether your servers are sitting right in Phnom Penh or halfway across the globe, if you are targeting Cambodian residents, you fall right under the extraterritorial scope of this law. There is zero hiding behind foreign servers. Now, when we break down the regulatory hierarchy, we're looking at 4 distinct tiers. And it's interesting because tiers 2 and 3, which are the common guidelines and sectoral rules, are actually still pending. But hey, don't let that fool you into waiting around. Tier 4, which covers your organization's internal regulations, is completely mandatory right now. This means every single controller and processor out there must have their own internal, enforceable rules governing exactly how their staff handles personal data today.
Okay, moving on to Section 2, rewiring processing habits, breaking old data hoarding rules.
So there are 6 core processing principles that now dictate pretty much every action you take with data. But I really want to highlight one in particular, data minimization. This principle explicitly attacks that old, comfortable habit of collecting national IDs, family contacts, or endless background details just in case. Because under the LDDP, collecting things just in case is actually unlawful. It is time to stop treating your servers like a giant digital attic. Seriously, if a data field isn't absolutely necessary for a specific, clear process, you've got to stop collecting it immediately.
Now remember what we said earlier about consent? When you look at the different legal bases for processing data, consent is actually the last resort. It's just one of 6 options. For example, if you're fulfilling an e-commerce order, your legal basis is contract, it's not consent. And that's a good thing. A contract basis is incredibly robust, whereas consent is honestly pretty fragile. I mean, a user can withdraw it at any time. So we really need to break the habit of defaulting to consent when another basis is just far more appropriate and secure.
But wait, what about sensitive personal data? Things like health records, biometric data, religious beliefs. Can you process those with just a single legal basis? The answer is a huge, resounding no. There is a very strict dual requirement at play here. To process sensitive data, you must have that baseline legal basis, and you also have to meet one of 9 specific conditions, things like explicit consent or occupational medicine. Having just one of those is completely insufficient. Which brings us to Section 3, accountability and rights, proving you are compliant. Let's clearly contrast 2 important concepts here. Doing the right thing in your day-to-day work, that is compliance readiness. But if the regulator suddenly knocks on your door, well, then you need inspection readiness. And how do you actually achieve that? With a ROPA. That stands for Records of Processing Activities. Believe me, this is literally the very first document inspectors are going to demand to see. If you don't have a structured ROPA documenting every single data flow, you just cannot demonstrate compliance. It doesn't even matter how good your underlying practices are.
Now, on the flip side of all that organizational accountability are the rights of the actual individuals. Data subjects now hold 9 really robust rights. For instance, if someone invokes the right to erasure, which you might know as the right to be forgotten, you generally have 30 days to respond and completely scrub their data across all your systems. And here is a super crucial detail. The right to object to direct marketing is absolute. Period. If they say stop, you must stop immediately. No balancing tests, no exceptions whatsoever.
To manage all this complexity, the law actually mandates an independent data protection officer, or DPO, for certain organizations. And I really want to stress that keyword, independent. You simply cannot have a conflict of interest here. That means the head of marketing or the head of IT, they cannot simultaneously be the DPO for the data processing that they themselves oversee. The DPO has to report directly to the absolute highest level of management so they can properly inform the business, monitor compliance, and cooperate directly with the regulator.
All right, let's move to Section 4, the nightmare scenario, breaches, fines, and the regulator.
I want you to burn this number into your brain, 72. Because when a data breach happens, you have exactly 72 wall clock hours to notify the MPTC once you become aware of it. And yes, in case you were wondering, that absolutely includes weekends and holidays. Your long weekend plans? Officially canceled. The clock starts ticking the very moment you have reasonable certainty that a breach actually occurred. Now, it's really important to understand that there is a massive difference between the two breach notification protocols in the law. Under Article 21, literally any risk to individuals triggers that 72-hour notification window directly to the MPTC. But then there's Article 22. If the breach poses a high risk, we're talking exposed passwords, financial data, things like that, you don't get that 72-hour luxury. You must notify the affected individuals themselves without undue delay. You absolutely cannot mistakenly stay silent just to protect your company's reputation. So let's map out that response timeline so you know exactly what to do when the panic inevitably sets in. Hour 0, that's pure detection and evidence preservation. Then, by hour 4, you need to triage and contain the damage. Moving up to hour 24, that time is for briefing your DPO and your legal counsel and getting those communications drafted. Finally, leading right up to hour 72, you execute your phased notification to the MPTC. And keep in mind, you don't have to wait until you know every single detail. A phased notification is perfectly acceptable, and honestly, it's required. Look, if you fail in these obligations, the penalties are graduated, sure, but they are incredibly severe. We're talking everything from cease and desist orders to massive administrative fines to the total reputational nightmare of having enforcement decisions published publicly. There's even potential criminal liability for officers and directors. No joke. But remember the mitigating factors. Prompt remediation and active, genuine cooperation with the MPTC can significantly reduce your penalty exposure. So you actually do have agency in how bad the punishment gets. I want to leave you with this final kind of provocative thought to chew on. If MPTC inspectors walked into your lobby in exactly 1 hour from now, what documentation could you actually hand them? Seriously, could you produce your ROPA? What about your internal regulations? It is time to stop relying on luck. This grace period is your one real chance to shift from theoretical compliance on paper to true operational readiness. Start making that shift today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.